to a podcast for radicals. This podcast is part of a Guide for Radicals series. I'm your host, Jason Bayless. If you're new to the series, let me introduce you to what we're all about. A Radical Guide began as a directory connecting people to radical spaces and movements, but it's grown into a global platform for education, organizing, and mutual aid. Through it, we amplify voices for justice, collective liberation, and transformative action. A Guide for Radicals builds on this work, exploring the history, ideas, and strategies behind systemic change. It's a resource for those who want to challenge oppressive systems like capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism, while imagining and creating alternatives rooted in equity, autonomy, and mutual care. This series takes those ideas even further, connecting theory to the practical steps we can take in our communities. Today's episode picks up where we left off. In our last conversation, we explored the principles and practices of liberation, what liberation means, and how it manifests in movements around the world. We discussed how liberation requires challenging systemic injustice and imagining new ways of being rooted in equity, justice, and collective care. Building on that foundation, we're diving into understanding systems of oppression and the cycle of socialization, a framework introduced by educator and activist Bobbie Harro. Together, we'll examine how socialization perpetuates inequality and explore ways to disrupt these cycles to create more just and liberated futures. Before we explore the cycle of socialization, it's important to understand the bigger picture: systems of oppression. These are interconnected structures like racism, patriarchy, and capitalism that create and sustain inequalities. They work by limiting access to resources, opportunities, and rights based on identity. These systems are not isolated. They reinforce each other to maintain power for a few while marginalizing others. Let's take a moment to imagine how these systems play out in everyday life. Picture walking into a corporate office where the leadership team is overwhelmingly white and male, while women and people of color occupy lower-paying support roles. This imbalance isn't just a coincidence. It's the product of systems that prioritize certain groups through hiring practices, educational access, and workplace policies. Consider another example: environmental racism. Communities of color often live near industrial plants or waste facilities, exposing them to higher levels of pollution and health risks. But let's address a common misconception. It's not that these communities move there. It's that industries are deliberately placed in or near historically marginalized neighborhoods. These communities are often targeted because of systemic classism and racism, which devalue their well-being and prioritize profit over people. Take Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where predominantly Black communities face alarming cancer rates due to the concentration of chemical plants. Many of these neighborhoods existed long before the industrial facilities arrived, with residents living off the land or working in local trades. Industries disrupted their livelihoods and health by moving into these areas, exploiting weak regulations and the systemic disenfranchisement of low-income and minority communities. These patterns reflect a broader system that sacrifices the health and futures of marginalized groups for corporate gain. At their core, these systems operate through power and privilege. They grant unearned advantages to certain groups, like wealth, safety, or authority, while denying those same benefits to others. Recognizing this dynamic is crucial because it's the first step in challenging these systems and imagining alternatives rooted in equity and justice. Let's pause here for a moment and understand that while these systems are pervasive, they are not permanent. They're upheld by human decisions and behaviors, which means they can also be dismantled and replaced with something better. Now, let's turn to the cycle of socialization, a framework that helps us understand how systems of oppression take root in our lives. Imagine a young tree in a forest. From the moment it begins to grow, the soil it's planted in, the sunlight it receives, and the surrounding environment all shape how it develops. Similarly, we are shaped from birth by the conditions we're born into, the soil of societal norms, values, and expectations. When we're born, we enter a world that already has mechanics in place, rules about what is considered normal or acceptable. Think of it as stepping onto a moving train. We didn't build the train, choose its direction, or decide the rules for passengers, but we're carried along by it nonetheless. For example, consider the labels and roles assigned to us at birth: gender, race, class. A baby born into a wealthy family will likely have access to better healthcare, education, and opportunities than a baby born into poverty. These initial conditions, completely beyond our control, start shaping our experiences and perspectives immediately. Another way to think about this is like learning a language. As infants, we absorb the words and structures spoken around us without understanding them at first. Similarly, we absorb societal norms and expectations long before we can consciously question them. These early experiences lay the foundation for how we see ourselves and others, and they set the stage for the next phases of the cycle of socialization. We now move into the first socialization, the stage where it all begins to take shape. Picture this: a child sits at the kitchen table, watching their mother prepare dinner while their father reads the newspaper. Without anyone saying a word, the child starts to absorb an unspoken lesson about roles: who does the work at home, who makes decisions, and what's expected of men and women. This is the first stage of the cycle of socialization, where our closest caregivers, parents, grandparents, siblings, are our first teachers. It's through them that we learn how the world works, what's acceptable, and how we're supposed to fit into it. Imagine the faint sounds of a lullaby playing in the background, or a parent gently correcting a child. Boys don't cry, or girls should be polite. These small repeated messages are like drops of water shaping a stone over time. It's not always what's said, but also what's done. A child might see their brother encouraged to play sports while they're given a doll, or hear family members laugh off a racist joke. These experiences plant seeds of belief about gender, race, and identity, beliefs that will grow and shape how they interact with the world. But it's not always so overt. Sometimes the lessons are subtle. Maybe a child notices who gets praised and who doesn't. They might see how their family reacts to someone who looks or acts differently. Each interaction, each word, adds another layer to their understanding of what is normal, valuable, or even possible. The thing to remember here is that these lessons aren't chosen by the child. At this stage, they are passive participants, soaking in the environment around them. And because families are also shaped by the larger systems of oppression we talked about earlier, these initial teachings often reflect and reinforce those systems. Let's pause here and think about this. If you're reflecting on your own upbringing, what were some of the first messages you learned about who you were supposed to be? Were they empowering? Or did they limit what you thought you could do or how you saw others? As we grow older, the lessons we learned during first socialization are reinforced through institutions and cultural norms. Think of it as moving from the small circle of family into the larger world. Schools, workplaces, the media, and religious organizations all play a role in shaping and solidifying the ideas we carry about ourselves and others. Take schools, for example. Imagine a classroom where history lessons focus almost exclusively on European achievements. Textbooks mention slavery and indigenous displacement briefly, but glorify manifest destiny and industrial progress. What's missing from that picture? The voices of those who resisted oppression, the stories of indigenous sovereignty, or the labor struggles that shaped the working class. These omissions teach students which histories are valued and which are erased. Media is another powerful teacher. Think about the kinds of stories Hollywood tells us. How often do you see Black characters portrayed as heroes, not sidekicks, or women in leadership roles without being reduced to stereotypes? The media doesn't just entertain, it defines what's aspirational and what's possible. For example, consider the villainization of activists in mainstream news. An environmental protest might be framed as disruptive rather than necessary, reinforcing the idea that maintaining the status quo is more important than challenging injustice. These narratives influence how society views resistance and those who engage in it. Religion and cultural traditions also play a role. For some, religious teachings may reinforce patriarchal norms, such as the idea that men should lead and women should follow. In other cases, traditions might exclude certain groups, like LGBTQ plus individuals, by defining them as outside the bounds of acceptance. While religion can also inspire liberation movements, its institutional role often mirrors the larger systems it exists within. These cultural and institutional forces work together like an orchestra, playing the same tune of conformity. Each part, schools, media, religion, workplaces, amplifies the others, ensuring the cycle remains intact. But just as we can recognize the melody of oppression, we can learn to change it. Take a moment to think about how institutions in your life, schools, workplaces, or even the TV shows you grew up watching, shaped your understanding of the world. What messages did they reinforce about who you are and who you could be? Let's now focus on enforcements, the mechanisms that keep the cycle of socialization running smoothly. Think of them as the guardrails of the system, rewards for staying on the path and punishments for stepping off. These enforcements can be subtle or overt, but their impact is significant. Imagine this scenario. A woman in a male dominated workplace advocates for equal pay during a team meeting. She's met with silence, maybe a few dismissive glances. Later, she hears whispers labeling her as too aggressive or hard to work with. That backlash isn't random. It's a way to enforce the status quo and discourage others from speaking out. The message is clear: stay in your lane. Enforcements don't just happen at work. Think about the playground. A boy who cries after scraping his knee might hear, "Stop crying, be a man." This seemingly harmless comment reinforces a narrow definition of masculinity, teaching boys to suppress emotions. Over time, these messages shape who we become, limiting how we express ourselves and connect with others. Media often amplifies these enforcements. As mentioned earlier, consider how news outlets portray activists. Environmental protesters might be described as troublemakers, while those defending corporate interests are called innovators. These narratives discourage resistance and reward conformity, shaping public opinion about what's acceptable. And then there's the legal system. Laws themselves act as enforcements. Think of anti protest legislation, which criminalizes acts of dissent. The system sends a message: challenging the status quo comes at a price. Let's take a moment to think about this. When was the last time you noticed someone being rewarded for conforming to societal norms or punished for stepping outside of them? How did it make you feel, and what did it teach you about your own behavior? These enforcements are powerful, but recognizing them is the first step toward change. Once we see how they operate, we can begin to disrupt their hold on us and others. At this point in the cycle, individuals face a pivotal choice: to perpetuate the system or to begin the process of change. This moment of awareness is a crossroads, often fraught with fear, uncertainty, or insecurity. But it is also where liberation begins. Imagine this as climbing a steep hill. At the base of the hill, it's easier to stay put, surrounded by the familiar landscape of societal norms. The climb, however, requires effort and perseverance. With each step, the view widens, and the weight of old beliefs begins to lift. The choice to climb, to step outside the cycle, is the first act of resistance and transformation. Let's take a real world example. Think of a person working in a company that enforces discriminatory hiring practices. At first, they might go along with it, afraid of speaking out. But perhaps over time, they begin to question why certain groups are excluded and decide to challenge the policy, risking backlash but choosing integrity. That single act can spark broader awareness and inspire others to join in creating change. Breaking the cycle requires both internal reflection and external action. It involves unlearning the harmful norms we've internalized and imagining new ways of being. For instance, dismantling internalized biases about gender roles might start with examining why certain tasks are labeled women's work or men's work. This reflection can lead to collective efforts, like advocating for shared responsibilities in workplaces or homes. Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever faced a choice between conforming to societal norms or challenging them? What held you back? Or what propelled you forward? How did that experience shape your understanding of justice and change? This is the direction for change, choosing to move toward a world that values equity, justice, and liberation. It's not an easy path, but it's one that grows stronger with every step we take together. We've spent this episode exploring how systems of oppression shape our lives and how the cycle of socialization perpetuates inequality. Now it's time to focus on what we can do about it. Taking action is where transformation begins. It's about breaking free from the cycle and choosing to create something better. Imagine this: you're standing at a crossroads. To one side is the well worn path of conformity, familiar and easy to navigate. To the other is a less trodden trail, overgrown but full of possibility. Choosing action means stepping onto that uncertain trail, not just for yourself, but for others too. Action doesn't have to mean grand gestures. It begins with small, deliberate steps in your daily life. Let's paint a picture of this. Picture a workplace where meetings are dominated by the same voices. What if you used your voice to amplify others? A simple phrase like, "I'd like to hear what Jessica thinks about this," can create space for someone who might otherwise go unheard. Or imagine you're at a family gathering and someone tells a joke rooted in stereotypes. Taking action might mean calmly saying, "I don't think that's funny because it reinforces harmful ideas." These moments, while uncomfortable, plant seeds of awareness and resistance. Action also means joining forces with others. Think of mutual aid networks that create webs of care and communities. For example, a group of neighbors organizes weekly meal shares, ensuring that everyone has food. Or a collective comes together to pool resources for legal support, childcare, or housing repairs. These are acts of solidarity that remind us we're stronger when we rely on one another. Consider getting involved with local movements or initiatives. Start by asking, what does my community need? And how can I contribute? Whether it's organizing a Skillshare program, volunteering at a community garden, or simply showing up to a rally, every act of solidarity strengthens the fabric of resistance. Taking action also means pushing for change within the systems we're part of. This could look like advocating for inclusive hiring policies at your workplace, starting a union, or organizing teach-ins at schools to diversify the curriculum. One powerful example comes from student activists who lobbied to include Black and Indigenous histories in their high school curriculum. They petitioned, spoke at board meetings, and built coalitions with teachers and parents. Their efforts led to tangible changes in what was taught, shifting the narrative for future generations. Finally, taking action isn't a one time effort, it's ongoing. Think of it as tending a garden. You plant the seeds of change, but those seeds need care to grow. This might mean checking in with the people you're organizing with, reflecting on what's working and what isn't, and celebrating small victories along the way. It's also about taking care of yourself and others. Burnout can halt even the most passionate efforts, so make time for rest, joy, and connection. Remember, sustainable movements are built by people who value their own well being as much as the cause they're fighting for. What's one action you can take today to challenge the cycle of socialization? It could be as small as starting a conversation or as big as joining a community effort. Reflect on how you can contribute to the larger work of liberation while sustaining yourself and those around you. Let's turn now to what might be the most difficult yet most transformative part of breaking the cycle of socialization: the emotional core. This is the space where all the feelings tied to resistance, change, and unlearning come to the surface. It's not just about understanding the systems or knowing the steps to take action. It's about confronting the discomfort, fear, and even pain that comes with stepping outside the norms we've been taught to follow. Imagine this: you're sitting at a family dinner, and the conversation turns to a topic where your values clash with those of your loved ones. You want to speak up, but your chest tightens, your heart races, and you feel a wave of fear. What if I upset them? What if they see me differently? This fear of rejection or conflict is a powerful emotional barrier that often keeps us from challenging the status quo. These emotions, fear, guilt, shame, are not unique to you. They're tools of the system. Fear keeps us quiet. Guilt makes us doubt our right to take action. Shame isolates us, convincing us that we're the problem rather than the systems around us. But these emotions are also signals. They show us where the work needs to happen, both within ourselves and in our relationships with others. Think of these emotions as waves. At first, they can feel overwhelming, as if they might pull you under. But as you learn to stay present with them, you begin to notice that they rise and fall. They don't last forever. Leaning into discomfort is like learning to swim. You build strength and resilience with practice. For example, someone might feel guilt about the privileges they hold, like being able bodied or having access to higher education. That guilt can either paralyze them or motivate them to use their privilege to uplift others. The shift happens when they move from focusing on their guilt to focusing on the change they can create. What emotions come up for you when you think about stepping outside societal norms? How do you respond to those emotions? Do they hold you back or push you forward? Another key part of this work is building connections with others who share your values. Emotions can isolate us, but they can also unite us. When we come together to share our experiences and struggles, we remind each other that we're not alone. This solidarity is an antidote to the shame and fear the system uses to keep us apart. Imagine a group of neighbors coming together to address an injustice in their community, like unfair housing policies. At first, each person might feel too small to make a difference, but as they share their stories, they begin to see their collective power. Their courage grows, and with it, their ability to take on bigger challenges. Finally, let's talk about hope. The emotional core of this work isn't just about facing discomfort, it's also about finding the hope and joy that sustain us. Hope isn't naive optimism, it's the belief that change is possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It's what allows us to imagine a better world and take steps toward it, no matter how small. Think about the moments that bring you hope. Maybe it's seeing a community garden flourish in an urban neighborhood or watching young activists take the stage at a rally, their voices filled with conviction. These moments remind us why this work matters and give us the strength to keep going. What gives you hope? What moments remind you that change is possible, even when it feels far away? How can you hold on to that hope as you move through the challenges of this work? We've traveled through some powerful ideas today, understanding systems of oppression, examining the cycle of socialization, and exploring the emotional core of this work. Now it's time to turn those ideas into action. Change doesn't happen by itself, it happens because people like you choose to act, one step at a time. Let's break this down into a few key actions you can take starting today. Start with yourself. Think about where you are in the cycle of socialization. What beliefs or behaviors have you inherited, and how do they align or conflict with your values? This kind of reflection isn't about guilt, it's about awareness. You can't change the system if you don't understand your place within it. Earlier, we discussed identifying those first socialized lessons, like gender roles or stereotypes, and asking, do I still believe this? If not, how can I unlearn it? What's one belief you've been taught that you now know is harmful? How can you start challenging it today? Next, find others who share your values. Social change is collective work, and you're not in it alone. Whether it's joining a mutual aid network, starting a conversation with neighbors, or participating in a local action, connection is the key to breaking isolation and building power. Liberation is a group effort. No one gets free alone. Look for opportunities to engage with local movements. Maybe it's attending a community meeting or reaching out to a group organizing around issues you care about. Small actions lead to big change when done together. You don't have to wait for a perfect moment or a major movement. Start where you are with what you have. Earlier, we talked about actions like amplifying underrepresented voices at work, calling out harmful jokes in social settings, or creating a shared resource like a tool library or community garden. Start small, stay consistent, and watch the ripples grow. Take one step today, whether it's reaching out to a community organizer, donating to a cause, or educating yourself on an issue that matters to you. Each step adds momentum to the larger work of change. And remember, a radical guide can help connect you. Finally, remember that this isn't a one time effort. Systems of oppression are persistent, but so are we. Sustaining this work means finding joy and hope in the process. Celebrate your wins, even the small ones, and take time to care for yourself and your community. Change starts with a decision to challenge what's wrong and imagine what's possible. As you leave today's episode, I want you to remember that liberation is within reach, but it requires all of us working together to create it. If you're ready to take the next step, visit a guide for radicals at radicalguide.com. There you'll find more resources, tools, and ideas to support you in this journey. And if you've already started taking action, share your story with us using the hashtag #ARadicalGuide. Your voice matters, and your efforts inspire others. If you value the work we're doing and want to help sustain these conversations, consider making a tax-deductible donation to A Radical Guide. Your support ensures we can continue highlighting the histories, ideas, and strategies that empower movements for justice and liberation. Every contribution makes a difference. Thank you for being here and for committing to this work. Together, we can disrupt the cycles that hold us back and build a world rooted in justice, equity, and liberation. Until then, keep working together, keep resisting, and remember, follow ideas, not people.